Okay, so we're on page 45. We're discussing still Across 5 Aprils. And here's what I want to do first. I want you to look on page 35, or sorry, not 35, 45. And I want you to look about halfway down the first column, a little further than halfway down the first column, the paragraph that starts out, "Put your gun down, Jeff." Does everybody see that?
Yeah.
Do you see where it is? Did you find it, Hope?
Mm-hmm.
Everybody got it? Okay. That is a really good example of dialect. Okay? So when you're reading through something and you come across something that's like, that's not how the word "your" is spelled. Why would they write it like that? Read it out loud and it'll make more sense to you. Because
Put your
gun down, Jeff. I ain't aiming to hurt you. I didn't ask to take the chance of Ed Turner hearing me call to you. That's dialect. Okay? So let's work through that a little bit. Put, everybody knows what put means. We're going to do this word by word, just as an example for you guys before we move on. So put, that's just regular, right? Your. Now what does that mean?
It's like you on the Y-O-U-R.
Yeah, it belongs to you. The word "your," the way it's spelled there, is actually a word. It means past, but that's not it here. Johnny's right. It is so that you kind of know there's a little bit different way he's pronouncing it.
There's a lot of dialect in King James Version.
That's more archaic than dialect, but yeah. Because it's older language in the King James Version Bible. Okay, I ain't aiming to hurt you. Ain't. Do you guys ever use that word?
Yeah.
Sometimes. It's considered non-standard grammar. But what does it mean?
I'm not.
Am not. Yeah. Or are not. Yeah. And then aiming.
Aiming would be,
How would you say the word aiming?
Well, I would say I'm aiming at the military.
I'm aiming.
If I was shooting.
We up here in Oregon, we drop our G's just a little bit, but not the way they do down south. You would say I'm aiming, right? And so you can hear the G at the end. That's easy. Ye. I ain't aiming to hurt you. Ready? You. It just means you. Ye means you. Johnny pointed out that's similar to the King James Version of the Bible. In older English, like in Shakespeare, and in really, people often used ye and thee and thou off and on through the 1800s until it totally gave way to you and your. So ye is just you. I didn't dast. Do you guys know what dast means?
No.
Can you guess from the context what dast means?
Quick. Dare.
Dare. You're right, Talon. Very good. Dare. Yes, I didn't dare. I didn't dast. That's a colloquialism. That's a local way of saying it. You don't dast do something. That's actually older than... that's an older form of the word. So it's actually not so much regional as it is age-wise. Chanced. Yeah, it's just chance. Yeah, you're right, Talon. Remember to speak up for the microphone. It just means chance. And there are groups of people in the U.S. that will add T's to the ends of words the same way Southerners drop G's off the ends of words. Chanced. Washed. They add a T to the end of the word. And then hearing, same way. They just drop the G, okay? So that's just a good example. Just a little kind of just a little snippet of it to kind of show you how to kind of work through that. So if you're reading through this and you're like struggling with things, honestly, truthfully, you'll be like, but I'm gonna look silly. Okay, then look silly. It's better to look a little silly at home when you're reading than to not have the knowledge you need when you come to class, right? It's okay to look a little silly. And if somebody goes, why are you doing that? You're like, because this is the best way to learn this. And you can be like all superior about it. Because you're learning. Okay, so who was Jethro hoping the stranger would be? So when he goes into the woods and he sees it's a person, who was he hoping it would be? Who was he hoping it would be? Talon?
Bill.
Bill. And Bill is whom? Who is Bill? Johnny?
One of his brothers.
One of his brothers. He was really hoping Bill would be there. What's the first clue that you have that the man is not Bill? The first clue that you have that this is not Bill. Johnny?
How he told Jethro that he's grown. And he's grown.
That's not the first clue. That's not, I mean, obviously, once he sees his face, he knows it's not Bill. Brady?
Because his parents have been talking about him.
Nope. This is kind of a tricky one, and so I'll go ahead and give it to you. The person that came out, the stranger, was wearing a Union uniform. Bill had joined the Confederate Army. So he knew it wasn't Bill because the person wasn't wearing a Confederate uniform. They were wearing a Union uniform. Okay?
Why does it say he was a skeleton?
Why would somebody be described as a skeleton? What does that mean?
Maybe super skinny.
Super skinny. Super skinny. When you haven't eaten in a long time, you lose weight.
He said he got rabbits and cooked them over a fire.
Yeah, but you can't always eat that way.
Yeah.
Right? When you can get them, right? And that's not always enough, especially if you're moving constantly. Right? Aren't you hungrier on days that you exercise? Yeah. And so it calls him a skeleton. That is hyperbole. Now, we're not going to specifically talk about hyperbole today, but I will tell you, hyperbole is exaggeration, either for emphasis or for humorous effect. In this case, it's for emphasis because there's nothing funny about this, right? When he's called a skeleton, he's not an actual skeleton, right? So that's figurative language. But it means that he's gotten so thin that you can just see every little bone. That there's just, there's hardly any meat on his bones. He's just so thin. Okay? When you look at this page, there are some clues there as to what the conditions were on the battlefront. So what do you know? When you read this page, just this page, what do you know about what conditions were like for Civil War soldiers on both sides? What do you know? What are the clues that tell you that? Johnny?
I don't know what I was going to say.
Okay. Talon?
That they couldn't eat a lot.
They couldn't eat a lot? And what tells you that?
The skeleton.
The skeleton comment, yeah. Yeah, the skeleton comment. That we know that there wasn't a lot to eat. There wasn't a lot to eat. What else do you know? Because there's a couple of things there that you can kind of get from that. Grace?
She said the clothes were ragged and dirty, so that means they're living in a rough environment.
Clothes were ragged and dirty. They were living in a rough environment. That's right, Grace. That's a good observation. And so obviously there wasn't any place for him to wash his clothes or his body. Right? Which is just... Have any of you guys ever gone camping or gone somewhere where you didn't get to bathe for a couple of days? How do you feel at the end of that? Are you glad to take a shower? Just thinking about it makes me itch. Brady?
It also says that
The hair was lank and matted, and it fell over the skeleton's forehead and down to its eyes. So that tells me that they couldn't really cut their hair anymore.
Yeah, and there were, if you look at photographs of the Civil War, men had, there was a lot of variation in men's hairstyles. Some men had short hair, some men had long hair. There was a lot of variation in men's hairstyles during that time period, kind of like there is now. And so it wasn't like everybody had short hair and so his hair was grown out. So it could have been that he had long hair to begin with. But when we say lank, do you guys know what that means? The word lank?
Damp.
What?
It was lank and matted. His hair was lank and matted. And in that
Dirty.
it means kind of limp. Like, you know how when somebody's hair is just, maybe they haven't washed it in a few days and it's just kind of, that's lank. Okay. And then matted. Do you guys know what that means? Tangled. But like so tangled that it looks like a mat or a rug and you can't get the tangle out. In fact, when hair gets to that point, sometimes all you can do is cut it. That actually happened to me when I was a little girl because I had long hair and my hair is curly. And I went to bed with it wet. And I woke up and there was a mat in the back of my, and so my mom ended up having to cut several inches off of my hair to get it out because it had gotten all tangled and I just went to bed with it wet and loose and braid it. And so it got all matted and my mom couldn't get it out because it was so tangled it looked like a mat or like a rug, and so you can't pull it apart. Yeah. So it's kind of a gross description if you look at it up at the top on page 45 at the top of that second column. You're like, ooh, ragged, filthy. Yeah. And so you know that this person's been through something
A lot.
And a lot of awfulness, right? Yeah. When Jethro realizes who it is. So Eb is his, how is he related to Eb? You guys remember? Who is Eb? Does anybody remember?
Isn't he his cousin?
He is his cousin. You are correct. Eb is his cousin. So this is somebody he knows. And yet he didn't recognize him. Right? Which is another clue that maybe Eb has changed a lot because of the war. Right? It says, Eb, he exclaimed in a voice hardly above a whisper. It's Eb, ain't it? There was utter despair in the soldier's voice. Yes, he said, I reckon it's Eb, what there's left of him. What do you think Eb means by that when he says that about himself? Yeah, it's me, what there is left of me.
He's changed.
He's changed. He's changed. And he's been through a lot. We talk about this a lot now. When we talk about soldiers coming back from war with PTSD, they used to call it shell shock. But they didn't really talk about it much. That's a pretty recent phenomenon that we've acknowledged and understood that war does damage to a person. That it does damage to a person, and that you have to have help getting through it. And some people need more help than others, right? Back then, there wasn't any of that. You just got through it, and then you pretended like it didn't happen.
That's sad.
It's just, it is what it is. And so Eb is obviously, wow. When Jethro sees him, he forgets about something for a minute. What does it say he forgot about for a minute? Or for a few seconds? Talon?
Federal registers.
The federal registrars, and what else does it say? Johnny?
That he was a deserter.
Yeah.
That he could be a deserter.
Because he forgot about the federal registrars, which were the government officials responsible for keeping records, And he forgot about not only the word which preceded Ebb, so the rumors that came before Ebb, but his method of announcing himself gave credence to the suspicion that he was a deserter. What does give credence to mean? Hope, can you read that definition? It's at the bottom of 45. Give credence to. Can you read that?
To is a phrase that means one support to the truth of something.
That's right. So when you give credence to something, that means that you are supporting the idea that it's the truth. So the way Ebb announced himself by not just coming out freely into the open, but kind of hiding and kind of doing the turkey call, right? Gave credence to or lent support to this idea that he was a deserter. But Jethro had kind of forgotten about all of that in the moment, right? Why do you think he had forgotten about all that in the moment? Johnny?
He's happy to see his cousin.
He's happy to see his cousin.
Because all of his family left.
Yeah. And also kind of like, whoa. If you see somebody you love and they look really, really terrible, aren't you kind of like taken aback for a minute? You're like, whoa, what's going on with you, man? You know, you get a little worried, and so other things kind of drop out of your mind. So yeah, he's happy to see his cousin. Hey, you're here, you're home. And also, you look terrible. And so all of the stuff about Ebb maybe being a deserter and the laws around desertion and all of that just kind of go out of his mind. Jethro could only remember that this was Ebb, a part of the family, the boy who had been close to Tom, the soldier who would have more vivid stories to tell of the war than ever a newspaper would be able to publish. He held out his hand. What do you think it means that Jethro held out his hand to Ebb? What do you think that means? Johnny?
He's willing to help him.
He's willing to help him. Yeah, he's willing to help him. So on 46, Ebb kind of stops Jethro in his tracks because Jethro is holding out his hand. Now, when you hold out your hand to somebody, what does that mean?
It means you're willing to help him.
You're willing to help them, but literally, if I were to meet you in the store one day and I were to hold out my hand to you, what would that mean?
Handshake.
Yeah, handshake. You're going to shake hands, right? You're going to show friendliness in that way, and you're going to shake hands. Not these days, right? We don't shake hands right now. But generally speaking, yeah. No, not funny. Okay, so he says, Ebb, it's good. It's so good to see you. Pa and Ma will be. He stopped suddenly, noticed that Ebb ignored his outstretched hand. Now, if you're holding your hand out for a handshake or a high five and somebody leaves you hanging, what does that usually mean? Nope. Not going to shake your hand, not going to give you a high five. Now, nowadays, that's like, dude, you forgot we got a virus going around. But normally, you'd be like, dude, don't leave me hanging. What's going on? Something's wrong, right? We understand in the social niceties that something is wrong. And so, like I have been places where like maybe my allergies are bothering me and I've had to blow my nose, but I haven't been able to wash my hands. And I'll say, please excuse me for not shaking your hand, but my allergies are bothering me today. And so, you don't want to, it's a nice way of saying you don't want to shake my hand. I haven't had a chance to wash it. Or, you might say, I broke my, or I sprained my wrist and so I can't shake hands or whatever. Like there's usually some kind of reason for it, or it's rude. That's one of the two, right? Or they just don't like you.
Got you.
Rude, right? So it's either rude or there's some kind of reason. So he noticed that Ebb ignored his hand. What is Ebb's response? Because Jethro is, Pa and Ma will be, and then he stops. And Ebb kind of supplies the rest of that sentence. What does Ebb say Jethro's Pa and Ma will be?
Your Ma and Pa will be scared.
Your Ma and Pa will be scared. You see how it's spelled there? So that's, again, it's another showing of dialect there. Scared. and it means scared. You're absolutely right. Why would they be scared? Why would they be afraid? Johnny?
Because he's a deserter, and they could be fined for keeping him.
Yeah, they could get in
secret.
trouble. That's exactly right. They could get in trouble, scared for themselves and ashamed of me. So they would be scared for themselves because they could get in trouble, but why would they be ashamed?
Because back then people really didn't like people who deserted them.
Well, I mean, it's the same way now, right?
Yeah.
When you hear news stories of somebody who's gone AWOL, you're like, well, that person deserted his post. It's a pretty big deal, right? I mean, that kind of story makes the news when it happens because it's like such a, thing to be ashamed of. And Eb just up and admits it. He just up and admits it. He says, I deserted, I up and left old Abe's army of the United States. So he says right there, this is what I did. The rumors are true. I deserted. Why? He tries to explain it. Why did he desert? Why did he leave his post? Why did he leave his post? Brady, nice and loud, please.
He couldn't stand seeing all the dead bodies everywhere.
Yeah.
They had to bury them, and he just couldn't stand that.
When we study the Civil War next year, you guys are going to get a glimpse kind of into how many people died. Many, many thousands of young men died in the Civil War, on both sides of disease and of battle. And, he describes it here. We had another skirmish, and there was dead boys that we had to bury the next day, and we'd been licked again. What does that mean? We've been licked again.
Lost?
You lost! Not just lost.
You got your butt kicked.
You got your butt kicked. Got licked again.
Mike, you got your butt shot.
Yeah, you lost in a big way. It wasn't a close battle, right? It wasn't a close battle. It was a bad one, a bad loss. And again, when we study the Civil War next year, you guys will you'll learn that the Union suffered a lot of losses before they started winning. A lot of losses. In fact, things could have gone a very different way if President Lincoln hadn't finally found General Grant and General Sherman. And so we might be two countries now instead of one. That would be an interesting thing to think about. But it was going really badly for the Union. What does Jethro want Eb to do? What does he want him to do? What does he ask him to do? What does he ask him to do? It's there on 46. Johnny?
He asked him to tell him how Nancy is doing.
What does Jethro ask Eb to do?
Oh, ask him.
Yeah, other way around. Yeah. Brady?
Go to the house.
Come to the house. You gotta be louder, dude. Come to the house. Yeah, come on up to the house. Right? And what does he want him to do? Grace? Have a good meal. You're gonna need to be a little bit louder too, I think, Grace. He wants to have a good meal. You look like you could use a good meal and a wash and a shave. Right, and maybe we could find you some different clothes there, buddy. You're looking smelling kind of ripe. Come on up, have a good meal, and get cleaned up. And tell us all you know about Tom. What is Eb's response to Jethro's offer? Johnny?
He said he'd get his parents into trouble.
Yeah, it would get his parents into trouble. It would get him into awful trouble. And Jethro makes a good question. Now remember, Jethro's 11 years old here? He asks him a good question. He says, Eb, if you can't come up to the house, what did you come for? Why are you here? Why are you here? What is Eb's response? Grace?
He was upset and his face was with anger, and he came up because he said he couldn't help himself.
He couldn't help himself. He couldn't help himself. He says there be things that are too terrible to talk about. And you want to see the fields where you used to be happy. You want to smell the good air of old Illinois so much that you forget. You go crazy for an hour or so, and then you don't dare go back. What do you think that means? What is he talking about? There are things too terrible to talk about. Johnny?
People dying.
Well, yeah, people dying in battle.
Yeah.
In pretty ugly ways in battle, you know. And, I mean, you know, I could get pretty graphic about it. I don't want to, but, you know, there are things that, you know, where people would get torn apart. You know, and they didn't have clean surgical conditions. And so most times if you got a wound, the surgeons would end up just having to amputate. They couldn't save it. They couldn't keep infection from spreading, and so they'd just cut your arm off or your leg off or whatever off. Yeah. And so, you know, there are things too terrible to talk about. And when you get to that place, you just get to where you just miss home so much that you just want to see it one more time. And the next thing you know, you've left. And now you can't come back. Do you think from that little passage there, do you think Ebb, sorry, not Jethro. Do you think Ebb meant to leave?
Yeah.
Or did he just, like, in the heat of the moment, I just got to go home. And then he realized what he'd done. Yeah. I kind of think it's more that he just, there was so much and he was just, it kind of gives you a little bit of compassion for him, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Like, this is awful. This is terrible. And I just want to go home. And then you're halfway there and you realize, oh my goodness, what have I done? And now I can't go back. Because if he went back, what would happen to him?
Would have been in big trouble.
Yeah. Yeah, would have been in big trouble. Court-martialed or something. Yeah. How do you think, from the things that Ebb says and the descriptions in here, how do you think Ebb felt about himself at this point? How do you think he felt about himself? Johnny?
Ashamed of himself?
Ashamed of himself. Yeah. There's another word I'm thinking of.
Self-pity.
Yes, there's a little bit of self-pity there too, for sure. So he's ashamed of himself, but he's also like, but can you blame me? He's feeling a little bit sorry for himself too, which, I mean, I probably would too. But also, I think there's a little bit of, now he's trapped, right? There's not a solution to his problem. Because he knows what he did's wrong. He can't go home, because the people at home would get in trouble. But he can't go back because he's a deserter and he'll be punished. So he's kind of stuck in this sort of limbo. What am I supposed to do now, right? So he's ashamed of himself, and there's self-pity, and there's this little bit of, what do I do now? There's nowhere I can go. There's no place I can go. There's nothing I can do. I think we can relate to Ebb, maybe not as in an extreme of a way. Have you ever been in a situation where you were like, there's no way out of this. What am I going to do? I'm stuck. Never to the extreme, obviously, that Ebb has been. None of us in this room have been to war. Thank God, right? But we've been in situations where we're like, how do I get out of this? What am I going to do? And, you know, maybe it's something little, but it's still, you know, you can kind of relate to the feeling a little bit, probably. What illness, on 47, what illness caused Jethro's father to be unable to work? What was it that caused Jethro's father to not be able to work? Brady?
A heart attack.
A what?
A heart attack.
Yes, a heart attack. A heart attack. Back then, you didn't go to the doctor and get pills and surgery and whatnot. If you have a heart attack, that means you just have a weak heart and you have to be careful. There wasn't anything they could do about that back then. My dad never actually had a heart attack, but he had a regular stress test scheduled. And in the stress test, they discovered that he had 4 blockages. So before he had a heart attack, he went in for quadruple bypass surgery a few years ago. Like, they caught it before he had a heart attack, thank God, because they were like, this is bad and it could have killed you. And I was like, thank you, God, for protecting my dad. But, there's all kinds of stuff they can do now, right? There's medicine you can take. They know that you can change your diet. There's surgeries they can do, right? People survive heart attacks all the time nowadays. But back then, heart attack was it's serious now still, right? But back then it was like really serious. So now his dad is weak and he can't work the farm. When Eb asks Jethro if he had heard from his brother Bill, Jethro, have you heard from Bill? It says, Jethro says, so not a word, Jethro replied in a voice that was hardly audible.
Oh.
What does audible mean, Johnny?
You could hardly hear it.
You could hardly hear it. So audible means you can hear it. So if it's hardly audible, it means you can barely hear it. What do you think that conveys about how Jethro feels about the fact that he hasn't heard from Bill?
Worried.
Yeah, he hasn't heard from Bill. He's worried. Yeah. Worried, upset. Back then, if you didn't hear from somebody, and it would take a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks to get a letter. Right? It would take a while to get a letter anyway. So you might get a letter once a month if you're lucky. Maybe, possibly. But if you haven't heard a single word from somebody and they're off to war, what's the first thing you think?
They're dead.
They're dead or they're hurt. They're somewhere that they need help. You just don't know. It's hard to kind of think about those kinds of things and talk about those kinds of things because we know that most of us know somebody who's been at war, or we know somebody who knows somebody, maybe somebody else's dad or brother or something. And so it's sort of a difficult process for all of us when there's somebody that we love that we can't communicate with. I had a friend recently, last year, who was at basic training. And, this is a kid that, grew up at our church and, looks at us as his second parents and just really dear to us. And he was at basic training. And the only way we could communicate was through letters. And so Bethy and I would sit down every week and write letters to Daniel. And, we